Welcome back to the deep dive.
Great to be here.
If you're maybe an IGCSE business student or honestly just curious about how governments and businesses interact, you've definitely come to the right place.
Absolutely.
Today we're jumping into part 1 of Unit 1, that's understanding business activity, and we're focusing on two specific chapters from the source material you've got.
That's right. We'll be looking closely at Chapter 5 on public corporations and then Chapter 12, which covers government objectives and policies.
Yeah, so the idea today is really to, unpack the main ideas in these sections, kind of revise those key concepts.
Exactly. We'll be focusing on the main titles, those bold blue subtitles you might see, and the bullet points, especially looking at the pros and cons, the advantages and disadvantages they list.
Think of it like a guided tour through the key bits of the source material. And quick reminder, if you want more resources, you can always check out www.igcc-business.weebly.com.
Okay, let's dive in.
Right. Chapter 5 first, public corporations. So basically, what are we talking about here?
Okay, so these are businesses that aren't owned by private individuals like, shareholders or private owners.
Right.
Instead, they're either owned or controlled by the government. State-owned, basically.
Okay, state-owned. But why? Why would the government want to run a business? Wouldn't they just leave it to, private companies?
That's the big question. And the source gives us a few key reasons, the sort of advantages of doing it this way.
Okay.
One major one is avoiding duplication.
Duplication? How do you mean?
Well, think about something like water pipes or maybe railway lines. Does it make sense to have 2 or 3 different companies all digging up the road to lay their own pipes to every house?
No, that sounds incredibly wasteful.
Exactly. That's what they call a natural monopoly. In those situations, having one government-controlled entity can actually be more efficient. It stops resources being wasted.
Ah, okay. So it makes sense where competition itself would be inefficient. Got it. What else?
Another big one is maintaining control of strategic industries.
Strategic, really important stuff.
Yeah. Things like energy supply, maybe defense industries, sometimes major transport hubs. Governments often feel these are just too vital for the country's security or, economic stability to be entirely in private hands, where the main driver is profit.
Okay, that makes sense. National interest comes first. What about people's jobs? Does that ever come into it?
It does. Sometimes saving jobs is a key reason. A private company might be failing, threatening lots of jobs, and the government might step in and take ownership to prevent that.
Ah.
The source actually mentions an example, saving 1,400 jobs at Prestwick Airport back in 2013 through public ownership.
Wow. Okay, so a social safety net role, almost.
Kind of, yeah. And linked to that is filling the gap left by the private sector. Private companies, naturally, go where the profit is.
Right.
So what about essential services that maybe don't make a profit, like providing electricity to a really remote area or ensuring basic healthcare is available everywhere?
Private firms might just say no thanks to that.
They might. So public corporations are sometimes created to serve unprofitable regions or provide those essential services that the private market wouldn't otherwise deliver.
So public corporations are often about essentials, national interests, efficiency in specific cases, and maybe social goals like jobs. And the source mentions examples like Etihad or Emirates Airlines, Dubai World. So it happens globally.
Definitely. Different countries, different sectors, but the underlying reasons are often similar.
Okay, but it can't all be positive. There must be downsides, right? Reasons not to have government running businesses, the drawbacks.
Oh, absolutely. The source lists some significant ones. A major issue can be the costs to the government.
So.
Well, these public corporations don't always make a profit. Sometimes they make big losses.
And
who covers those losses?
the government, meaning the taxpayers.
Exactly. The source gives the example of SNCF, the French rail operator, losing hundreds of millions of euros in 2015 and 2016. That's a huge burden on public finances.
Ouch. Yeah, that's a big cost. What else?
Inefficiency is a common criticism. The argument is that without the pressure to make a profit, and maybe without direct competitors, they can become, well, a bit slow, bureaucratic, less focused on cutting costs or innovating.
Less competitive pressure, less drive.
That's the idea. Plus, you can get political interference.
Ah, politicians getting involved in business decisions.
Right. Decisions might be made for short-term political gain or to please certain groups rather than for the long-term health or efficiency of the business itself.
Okay, so politics can cloud business judgment.
It can. And finally, especially for the really big ones, they can just be incredibly difficult to control. Imagine managing something as vast as the UK's National Health Service. Millions of staff, huge budgets, an immense challenge.
Just the sheer scale is a management nightmare. Okay, so costs, inefficiency, political meddling, difficult to manage. These downsides sometimes lead governments to think again.
Exactly. And that often leads them towards privatization.
Right, selling off these government-owned businesses to the private sector.
That's the core idea. Flipping ownership from public to private. And just like there are reasons for public ownership, the source outlines the arguments for privatization too, the expected benefits.
What's usually the main motivation for selling?
Often, it's simply to generate income. Selling a major state asset like an airline or a utility company can bring in a lot of cash for the government budget pretty quickly.
A quick cash injection. Makes sense.
Another major argument is to reduce inefficiency. The belief is that a private company, driven by the need to make profits and answer to shareholders, will be much more motivated to cut costs, improve services, and be generally more efficient.
Bringing in that profit motive to sharpen things up.
That's the theory. It's also seen as a way to reduce political interference. Once it's privately owned, the day-to-day running should, in theory, be based on business logic, not political wins.
Get the politicians out of the boardroom, so to speak.
Kind of, and sometimes privatization goes hand in hand with deregulation.
Taking away rules.
Removing legal barriers that might have stopped other private companies from competing with the state-owned one before. So you sell the company, and you open the market up to competition at the same time.
Ah, okay. Like the source mentions with UK telecoms privatizing BT and then letting others compete.
Exactly. The hope is more competition leads to better service and lower prices. But privatization isn't always selling the whole company.
Oh.
It can also mean contracting out. So the government still pays for a service, like, say, cleaning in hospitals, but it hires a private company to actually do the work instead of employing the cleaners directly.
Okay, outsourcing government work.
Essentially, yes. And another form mentioned is the sale of council-owned property, letting tenants buy their government-owned homes. Examples like airports in the UAE or Telstra in Australia show this is a global trend.
Right. So lots of reasons for privatization: cash, efficiency, less politics, encouraging competition. It paints a clear picture of that shift.
It's that ongoing debate, public good versus private efficiency.
Definitely. And that brings us neatly to the second part, Chapter 12. Because government influence isn't just about owning companies, is it? It's much broader.
Oh, much broader. Governments set the whole legal framework, the basic rules every business has to follow. But they also actively try to manage the wider economy.
Manage the economy. What are their main goals there, usually?
Well, typically they aim for things like keeping inflation low so prices don't rise too fast, keeping unemployment down, and achieving steady economic growth. They use different policies and, importantly, taxes to try and steer things in that direction.
Okay, setting rules and trying to guide the economy. Let's talk about government spending. That must have a big impact.
Huge impact. Governments spend vast amounts on public services, healthcare, education, roads, defense, police, courts, you name it.
And where they spend it matters, right? The source mentioned New Zealand's 2015 spending, with welfare being the biggest slice.
Exactly. Priorities differ. But any significant government spending injects money into the economy. Think about building a new motorway or railway.
Construction companies get busy.
Right. Construction firms, engineers, suppliers of materials, they're workers. They all benefit. And then those workers spend their wages elsewhere. It creates a ripple effect, what economists call the multiplier effect. Government spending can really stimulate business activity.
Okay, so spending boosts business. But where does the money come from for all this spending?
Ah, well, that's taxation. Governments raise money by taxing people and businesses.
Like income tax from wages, corporation tax on company profits.
And VAT, that's value-added tax, on goods and services we buy.
Yes. And changing spending and taxes, that's fiscal policy, isn't it?
That's the term, yes.
Yeah.
Fiscal policy.
Yeah.
And how the government uses it has major effects of taxation on everyone.
How so, if taxes go up?
Well, higher income tax means people have less money left to spend, so consumer spending might fall. Higher corporation tax means businesses keep less of their profits, which might make them less likely to invest or expand.
So higher taxes tend to slow things down a bit. Less spending, less investment.
Generally, yes. And the opposite is also argued. Lower taxes can stimulate activity. The source mentions the Philippines cutting income tax, hoping people would spend more.
Right.
And lots of countries have cut corporation tax, like Ireland, Estonia, Finland mentioned in the text, hoping to attract businesses or encourage existing ones to invest more profit back into the business.
So tax cuts are meant to encourage spending and investment.
That's the idea. But governments can't just spend and cut taxes endlessly. There are real constraints on public spending.
Like if the country runs out of money or gets into too much debt.
Exactly. Financial crises are a stark example. The source uses Greece after 2008. They faced enormous debts and had to bring in austerity, basically, big cuts.
Cuts to what?
Things like public sector wages, pensions, and spending on health, education, defense. Really tough decisions.
And those cuts would then hurt businesses relying on government contracts or spending by public sector workers.
Definitely. It shows that government actions, both spending and cutting, have direct consequences for businesses. So, overall, governments affect business by changing laws, influencing interest rates, changing taxes and spending, sometimes giving subsidies. Lots of levers.
Okay, that's the big picture. Let's dive into some of those specific policy areas mentioned, like infrastructure provision.
Right. This is about the government actually building stuff.
Roads, ports, internet cables, that kind of thing.
Exactly. The essential physical framework the economy needs to function. Governments plan and fund these projects.
And that's obviously good news for certain businesses.
Oh, huge news.
Yeah.
Big infrastructure projects, like the Ugandan plan mentioned in the source, over 11 billion US dollars mean massive contracts for construction, engineering, material suppliers, and loads of related industries. It directly creates business opportunities.
So government building things, business growth. What about the rules?
Legislation.
Legislation is fundamental. Governments make laws to protect different stakeholders, people, or groups affected by business activities, like customers. So consumer protection laws.
Yes. These laws set standards. They make sure products are safe, information given to consumers is accurate, prices aren't misleading, and businesses don't use unfair tactics.
So things like food safety, making sure goods are fit for purpose.
Exactly. The source mentions UK laws like the Sale of Goods Act and Food Safety Act as examples. They cover quality, safety, information, pricing, how things are promoted, even how payments are handled. Businesses have to follow these rules.
Okay, protecting the consumer. What about protecting other businesses, like fair play?
That falls under competition policy. The basic idea is that competition between businesses is healthy. It drives innovation, quality improvements, and lower prices.
So the government tries to make sure competition actually happens.
Yes. They try to prevent monopolies where one company dominates everything and stop businesses from doing things that unfairly restrict competition, like fixing prices with rivals.
How do they do that?
They might use anti-competitive legislation to investigate or block mergers that would create too much market power. They might also try to lower barriers to entry, making it easier for new firms to start up and challenge existing ones. It's about keeping the market dynamic.
Right, level playing field. What about the planet? Environmental legislation?
Increasingly important. These are laws designed to limit the negative impact businesses can have on the environment.
Like pollution rules.
Yes. Controlling air pollution, water pollution, how businesses dispose of waste. Also rules encouraging things like recycling or using sustainable resources. Businesses face fines or other penalties if they break these environmental laws.
So rules for customers, competitors, and the environment. Busy lawmakers.
They are. And then there's the international dimension. Trade policy.
This is about buying and selling across borders.
Exactly. How governments manage imports and exports. Often, they use policies for protectionism.
Protectionism. Protecting their own country's businesses.
That's the aim. Shielding domestic industries from foreign competition, maybe to protect jobs or support key sectors. And they use various trade barriers to achieve this.
Barriers, like obstacles, what kind?
The source lists the main ones. Tariffs, which are basically taxes put on imported goods to make them more expensive than locally produced ones.
Okay, tax imports.
Then quotas, these are limits on the quantity of a certain good that can be imported, like only allowing 10,000 foreign cars in per year.
A physical limit?
Right. Subsidies are different. That's when the government gives financial help to its own domestic firms. This helps them lower their costs and compete more effectively against imports, or even sell cheaper abroad.
So helping local firms directly.
Yes. And finally, administrative barriers. This is more subtle, using complicated customs procedures, very strict health and safety rules, or lots of paperwork specifically to make it difficult or costly for foreign goods to enter the country.
Red tape as a weapon. So taxes, limits, help for locals, and bureaucracy, all ways to restrict imports.
Those are the main tools of protectionism. But on the other hand, countries also form trade blocs.
Like the European Union, where
Yeah.
they agree not to use barriers against each other.
Exactly. Trade blocs are groups of countries that reduce or completely eliminate tariffs and other barriers among themselves.
What's the advantage for a business inside one of these blocks?
Well, suddenly your home market is much bigger. You can sell easily to millions more customers in the other member countries. This allows for specialization, potentially lower costs through economies of scale.
Bigger market, bigger potential?
Right. And you often still get some protection from competitors outside the bloc, but there can be downsides too.
Oh, like what?
Well, it can cause friction with countries not in the bloc. And for businesses inside, they now face more intense competition from firms in other member countries, which can be tough if they weren't very efficient before.
So opportunities, but also more competition within the club.
Got it. One last big policy area, interest rates. How does the cost of money fit in? Interest rates are usually controlled by the central bank, following the government's overall monetary policy. It's a really powerful tool.
Because it affects borrowing.
Precisely. The interest rate is the cost of borrowing money and also the reward for saving it. If the central bank changes the main interest rate, it ripples through the whole economy.
So what happens if they raise interest rates?
If rates go up, borrowing becomes more expensive. Businesses planning to invest, maybe buy new equipment or build a factory, often borrow money to do that. Higher rates make those loans costlier, so they might put the investment on hold.
Less investment. What about consumers?
Same idea. Mortgages cost more. Credit card debt costs more. People have less disposable income, so they tend to cut back on spending, which of course isn't great for businesses selling things.
So higher rates generally cool down the economy, less investment, less spending.
That's the usual effect. The EU chart in the source showing rates falling after the financial crisis, that suggests they were trying to do the opposite, encourage activity.
So lower interest rates.
Lower rates make borrowing cheaper. That encourages businesses to invest, take risks, expand. It also makes borrowing cheaper for consumers, maybe encouraging them to buy cars, houses, spend more generally.
So lower rates act like an accelerator for the economy.
Generally speaking, yes. It stimulates demand and investment. Of course, the exact impact varies, but it's a major factor businesses watch very closely.
Wow, okay. That's a really comprehensive look, from government-owning businesses to tweaking taxes, laws, trade rules, and interest rates. They really do shape the environment businesses operate in.
Absolutely. You can't really understand business without understanding how government interacts with it. It's fundamental, especially for your IGCSE course.
Right, definitely key stuff. Okay, before we wrap up, let's do a super quick quiz, just checking a couple of points we covered from the sources. Ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, first one. Give me just one reason the source mentions for why a government might choose to keep a business as a public corporation.
Okay, one reason is to maintain control over a strategic industry, like energy or defense.
Perfect. Strategic control is definitely one. Avoiding duplication or saving jobs would have worked too. Okay, question 2. Name one type of trade barrier governments might use.
Tariffs, putting a tax on imports.
Tariffs it is. Quotas, subsidies, admin barriers were the others. Great. Last one. If interest rates go up, how might that affect a business's plan to borrow money for a big expansion project?
Higher interest rates mean borrowing is more expensive,
Mm-hmm.
so the business would probably be less likely to go ahead with the expansion. Or they might scale it back.
Exactly. Higher cost makes investment less attractive.
Fantastic. You've navigated those key ideas really well.
Well, hopefully it helps clarify how all these different government actions connect to the world of business.
Absolutely. So that brings us pretty much to the end of this deep dive. We've covered public corporations, the why not, and privatization, and then the whole range of government objectives and policies, spending, tax, all the different types of legislation, trade policy, and those crucial interest rates.
It's a lot, but hopefully seeing how it fits together makes it clearer. These are really core concepts.
Definitely. And remember, for more support with your IGCSE business studies, you can always head over to www.igcec-business.weebly.com.
Keep digging into these topics. They're fascinating.
And just to leave you with something to think about, we've talked about all the pros and cons, the reasons governments get involved or step back. Thinking about your own country, where do you think the right balance lies between government action and private business freedom? What factors matter most when deciding who should do what?
This is the big question, isn't it? No easy answers.
Indeed. Thanks so much for joining us on the deep dive today. We hope this has been helpful.